The Holy Gospel according to John. Glory to you, O Lord. Now, before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered, "You do not know now what I am doing, but later you will understand." Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "One who has bathed does not need to wash except for the feet, but is entirely clean. And you are clean, though not all of you," for he knew who was to betray him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." After he had washed their feet, had put on his robe, and had returned to the table, he said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example, that you also should do as I have done to you. Very truly I tell you, slaves are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me. And as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Jesus went out with his disciples to a place where there was a garden. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, so he brought a detachment of soldiers together with police from the chief priests and the Pharisees, and they came there with lanterns and torches and weapons, and they arrested Jesus and bound him. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Simon Peter and another disciple followed Jesus. A woman said to Peter, "You are not also one of this man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. It's passages like that that easily make John's gospel my favorite of the 4 gospels in our Bible. On the other hand, it's those parenthetical asides, maybe you've caught them, many of which have been leveled at Judas, of all people, that just make me want to cringe. Like 2 Sundays ago, when Judas objects to Mary's act of extravagance. Judas said, this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. Or in tonight's story, the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas to betray Jesus. We get it, John. You don't like Judas. And yet, in spite of those cringy parenthetical asides, or maybe even because of them. Jesus' enduring love for his disciples, his friends, is made all the more profound. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Jesus knew who was to betray him. Jesus knew who was to deny him. And in spite of all of this, he loves them to the end. We get a very specific, tangible example of what that kind of love looks like in the verses that follow. As Jesus gets up from the table, takes off his outer robe, ties a towel around himself, pours water into a basin, and begins to wash his disciples' feet. Now, surely, foot washing was a common practice of hospitality in Jesus' world, but it was also dirty work that would have been relegated to a servant or something that a host's guests would have likely had to do for themselves. But here Jesus flips that practice on its head. The master becomes the servant, the teacher taking the form of a slave, emptying himself before those whom his social world would have deemed lesser or inferior. The late theologian Jean Vanier, best known for his work of founding communities of care for adults with developmental and intellectual disabilities, knows something of what it means to serve those whom our culture has deemed inferior. In one of his first encounters with someone living with a disability, Vanier recounts being struck by their cry for relationship and to be loved and seen as a human being. He also talks about meeting another woman who was so astonished that he had devoted his life's work to ministering to persons with disabilities because, in her words, they're so frightening. But isn't it the case, Vanier reflects, that we see in others what we're afraid to see in ourselves? That we as humans are all fragile beings with weaknesses, limitations, even disfigurements, and we all have a need to be loved and accepted as we are. It's for this very reason that the now 156 L'Arche communities in 38 countries around the world that Vanier helped found focus on the body, and in particular suffering bodies and bodies that have been deemed inferior. Vanier has stressed the importance of touch and attention to the body in welcoming newcomers to a L'Arche community. In sharing about how he himself has been touched, in some cases physically, by those whom he serves, he speaks of a tenderness where touch is important. Touch which is not aggressive but welcoming, and which teaches something about what it means to be human and to relate to one another and to share life together. Which brings us back to our scene with Jesus. Touch, of course, is so central to the practice of foot washing, and this moment that Jesus shares with his disciples is perhaps the most intimate, vulnerable moment of connection that they experience together. This is the embodiment of the love with which Jesus loved them to the end. Jesus' love, the love to which we are called to embody ourselves, is a self-emptying love which is concerned for the other. It's a love which knows no bounds, and it's a love in which we are enveloped by a God who comes to us in the flesh, emptying God's self into Jesus for us, for the life of the world. It's a love that doesn't often make much sense to us, as Vanier has put it. Jesus was quiet. He ate with people who were caught up in prostitution, with tax collectors, with lepers. There's something so simple about Jesus that he is disarming. We don't quite know what to do with it, because frequently we would want a powerful Jesus who will put everything straight, who will cure everybody, who will do everything that we tell him to do. And it's just not like that. Jesus' love, with which he loves us to the end, is a vulnerable love that is full to the brim and overflowing. It is a love that holds no regards for human standards. It is a love without prerequisites or limits or exceptions. It is a love poured out for us in the water that washes over our feet, in the waters that wash over us in baptism. It is a love set before us at this table week after week. It is a love with arms extended wide on the cross. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end.